touch her! Please don't touch her!
And what he felt in that single moment changed everything. Not just for him.
The autumn wind carried dust across the open plains of Willow Creek, and Thomas Garrett wiped his weathered hands on his overalls as he walked toward the broken fence at the edge of his property. He had been farming this land for 12 years now, ever since his wife Margaret had passed away from fever, leaving him alone with nothing but 60 acres of wheat and a heart full of memories. Thomas was not a man who complained about his loneliness. He woke before sunrise, worked until sunset, and spent his evenings sitting on the porch, watching the stars appear, one by one over the endless horizon. His neighbors called him the quietest man in the territory, and they were probably right. Words had become difficult for Thomas after Margaret died. What was there to say when the person who understood you best was no longer there to listen? On this particular morning, Thomas had noticed something strange near the old wooden bridge that crossed a dried creek bed at the far corner of his land. There was movement there, something that did not belong to the natural rhythm of the prairie. He had assumed it was a coyote at first, or perhaps a stray calf from the Henderson Ranch 2 miles east. But as he walked closer, he realized it was something else entirely. A woman stood near the bridge, her back pressed against the rotting wooden posts, her arms wrapped protectively around something Thomas could not see. She was thin, almost dangerously so, with hair the color of autumn leaves tangled and dirty around her pale face. Her dress was torn at the hem, covered in dust from what must have been many miles of walking. But it was her eyes that stopped Thomas in his tracks. They were green, bright and fierce, filled with a kind of desperate courage that Thomas had not seen in many years. She watched him approach with the wariness of a wild animal, her body tensing with each step he took. Thomas slowed his pace, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. He had learned long ago that frightened creatures, whether animal or human, needed patience more than anything else. "Morning," Thomas said, keeping his voice low and steady. "Name is Thomas Garrett. This here is my land." The woman did not respond. Her arms tightened around whatever she was holding against her chest, and Thomas noticed for the first time that she was trembling. Not from cold, though. The morning air carried a chill that promised an early winter. She was trembling from fear, from exhaustion, from something Thomas could not yet understand. "You look like you could use some help," Thomas continued, taking another slow step forward. "Got a farmhouse about half a mile back. Warm fire, hot food. You are welcome to rest there, if you need." The woman shook her head quickly, pressing herself harder against the bridge post. "Stay back," she said, and her voice cracked from disuse. "Please, just stay back." Thomas stopped walking. He studied the woman more carefully now, noticing the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands shook as she clutched the bundle against her chest. She had been running from something. That much was clear. But what? And what was she protecting so fiercely? "I am not going to hurt you," Thomas said gently. "I am just a farmer. Nothing more." The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back quickly, as if crying was a luxury she could not afford. "That is what they all say," she whispered. "That is what everyone says before they take everything from you." Thomas felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the wall he had built around his heart after Margaret died. This woman had been hurt, betrayed, broken by the world in ways he could only imagine. He recognized that look in her eyes because he had seen it in his own reflection for months after he buried his wife. "I lost someone too," Thomas said quietly. "My wife. 12 years ago. I know what it feels like when the world stops making sense." The woman stared at him, her expression wavering between suspicion and desperate hope. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled through the dry grass, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out as it circled the open sky. Then the bundle in the woman's arms moved. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. It was not a bundle of possessions or stolen goods. It was a child, a small girl, no more than 4 or 5 years old, with the same autumn-colored hair as the woman who held her. The child's face was pressed against her mother's shoulder, her tiny hands clutching the fabric of the woman's dress. "She is sick," the woman said, and her voice broke completely now. "She has been sick for 3 days. I do not know what to do. I do not know how to help her." Thomas took a step forward without thinking, his instincts overriding his caution. He had helped birth calves, mended broken wings on injured birds, nursed countless animals back to health over the years. Surely he could do something for this child. "Don't touch her," the woman warned, her voice sharp with panic. "Please, do not touch her. Everyone who comes close wants to take her away from me. They say I cannot care for her, that I am not fit to be her mother, but she is mine. She is all I have left." Thomas stopped, his hand suspended in the air between them. He looked at the woman, really looked at her, and saw the truth of her words written in every line of her exhausted face. She had been fighting for this child, protecting her against a world that had tried again and again to tear them apart. And she was losing, not because she was weak, but because she was alone, because no one had stopped long enough to help instead of judge. "I am not going to take her," Thomas said, and he meant every word. "I am not going to take either of you anywhere you do not want to go. But that child needs help, and I might be able to give it. Please, let me try." The woman searched his face for a long moment, looking for the lie, the hidden cruelty, the inevitable betrayal. Thomas stood perfectly still and let her look. He had nothing to hide, no agenda beyond simple human kindness. If she could not see that, he would walk away and leave her in peace. But he hoped, more than he had hoped for anything in years, that she would trust him. Finally, slowly, the woman loosened her grip on the child. She did not hand her over, but she turned slightly, allowing Thomas to see the little girl's face for the first time. The child was beautiful, with round cheeks flushed pink with fever and long eyelashes that rested against her skin like delicate brushstrokes. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, and when Thomas gently placed his hand on her forehead, he felt the heat radiating from her small body. And then something happened that Thomas could not explain. Not then, and not in all the years that followed. When his rough, work-worn hand touched the child's burning skin, he felt a jolt run through his entire body. It was not pain, not exactly. It was more like recognition, like remembering something he had forgotten long ago. The world around him seemed to blur and shift, and for just a moment, he was not standing by a broken bridge on his lonely farm. He was somewhere else entirely. He was in a small house filled with warmth and laughter. Margaret was there, young and healthy, her smile bright as she bent over a cradle. And in that cradle was a baby, a little girl with autumn-colored hair, reaching up toward him with tiny, perfect hands. "Thomas," Margaret said, and her voice was exactly as he remembered it, soft and full of love. "She has been waiting for you." The vision lasted only a heartbeat, But when it faded, Thomas found that tears were streaming down his weathered face. He had not cried since the day he buried his wife. He had not allowed himself to feel anything beyond the dull ache of survival. But now, standing in the cold morning air, with his hand on a stranger's child, he felt his frozen heart begin to thaw. "What is it?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. "What is wrong?" Thomas shook his head, unable to find words for what he had just experienced. How could he explain that touching this child had somehow healed something broken inside him? How could he tell this frightened stranger that her daughter had just given him back something he thought he had lost forever? "Nothing is wrong," he finally managed to say. "Everything is going to be all right." He did not know why he was so certain, but he was. Looking at this woman and her sick child, he felt a clarity he had not experienced in 12 long years. He knew what he needed to do. "Come with me," Thomas said. "My farmhouse is warm, and I have medicine that might help. There is food, clean water, a place to rest. You can stay as long as you need. No one will bother you there." The woman hesitated, years of hard experience warning her against trusting anyone. But something in Thomas's tear-stained face must have convinced her, because she finally nodded, just once, and allowed him to guide her toward the farmhouse. The walk was slow, with the woman stopping frequently to shift the child's weight in her arms. Thomas offered to carry the little girl, but the woman shook her head. She was not ready to let go completely, and Thomas understood. Trust was built in small steps, not grand gestures. When they reached the farmhouse, Thomas opened the door and ushered them inside. The woman looked around with wide eyes, taking in the simple but well-maintained rooms, the fire burning low in the hearth, the quilts piled on the single bed in the corner. "This was my wife's home," Thomas said quietly. "She made it beautiful. I have just tried to keep it the way she left it." The woman nodded, and for the first time, something like understanding passed between them. They had both lost people they loved. They had both been left behind to navigate a world that suddenly made no sense. Over the next several hours, Thomas worked to bring down the child's fever. He made tea from dried herbs Margaret had planted in the garden years ago. Herbs that still grew wild around the farmhouse, as if his wife's spirit was nurturing them from beyond. He heated water and showed the woman how to make cool compresses, and together they tended to the little girl until her breathing eased and her fever began to break. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, the child finally fell into a peaceful sleep, her small hand curled around her mother's finger. The woman sat beside the bed, tears of relief streaming down her face, and Thomas busied himself in the kitchen, giving her privacy to feel whatever she needed to feel. When the woman finally spoke, her voice was steadier than it had been all day. "My name is Sarah," she said, "and this is my daughter, Emma. We have been running for 3 months now. My husband died in a farming accident last spring, and his family tried to take Emma away from me. They said I was too young, too poor, too broken to raise her properly." Thomas nodded, setting a bowl of warm soup on the table. "But you kept her." "I kept her," Sarah agreed. "I took her, and I ran, and I have been running ever since. I did not know where I was going. I just knew I could not let them have her." Thomas thought about what he had felt when he touched Emma. That strange, beautiful vision of Margaret and a baby girl they had never had the chance to conceive. He did not understand it, might never understand it, but he knew what it meant. You can stop running now, Thomas said. Both of you. This farm is too big for one person anyway. I could use the help, and Emma could use a stable home. If you are willing. Sarah stared at him, disbelief written across her face. You do not even know us. Why would you offer something like this? Thomas considered the question carefully before answering. Because when I touched your daughter, I felt something I thought I had lost forever. I felt hope. I felt like maybe my life was not over after all. Like maybe there was still a reason to get up in the morning. He paused, looking out the window at the land he had worked alone for so many years. My wife and I always dreamed of having a family. We never got the chance. When she died, I thought that dream died with her. But today, standing by that bridge, I realized that maybe dreams do not die. Maybe they just wait until we are ready to see them in a new way. Sarah was crying openly now, making no effort to hide her tears. I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything, Thomas replied. Just stay. Get some rest. Let Emma heal and see if this place might feel like home. That is all I ask. The days that followed were quiet and healing. Emma's fever broke completely within 48 hours, and the little girl's natural curiosity began to emerge as she explored the farmhouse with wide, wondering eyes. She followed Thomas around like a small shadow, asking endless questions about the animals, the crops, the way the stars look different here than in the town she remembered. Sarah worked alongside Thomas in the fields, learning the rhythms of the farm with surprising quickness. She was stronger than she looked, her thin frame hiding a resilience forged by months of survival and desperation. And slowly, day by day, the haunted look in her eyes began to fade. Thomas found himself smiling more than he had in years. He told Emma stories about the prairie, about the animals and plants that called this land home. He showed Sarah how to identify the herbs in Margaret's garden, how to preserve vegetables for winter, how to read the sky for signs of coming weather. And in the evenings, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the endless horizon, not speaking much, but comfortable in each other's presence. It was not a romantic love that grew between Thomas and Sarah, at least, not at first. It was something quieter, deeper, built on mutual respect and shared healing. One evening, as autumn turned toward winter, Emma climbed into Thomas's lap and looked up at him with her mother's green eyes. "Are you my grandfather?" she asked with the blunt curiosity of childhood. Thomas looked at Sarah, who nodded slightly, giving him permission to answer however he chose. He thought about Margaret, about the vision he had experienced that first morning, about the family he had never had, and the one that had somehow found him anyway. "I would like to be," he said softly, "if that is all right with you." Emma considered this seriously, then nodded and nestled against his chest, satisfied with his answer. And Thomas Garrett, the quietest man in the territory, held this child who was not his blood, but was somehow his nonetheless, and felt the last of his frozen heart finally, completely, melt. Sarah reached over and took his hand, squeezing gently. No words were needed. They both understood that something miraculous had happened on the lonely farm, something that defied explanation but demanded gratitude. They had found each other at the exact moment they needed to be found, and in finding each other, they had each been given a second chance at the life they thought they had lost forever. The farm that had been silent for 12 years was now filled with laughter, with purpose, with the kind of everyday joy that Thomas had forgotten existed. Margaret's memory did not fade, but it transformed, becoming not a source of grief, but a guiding light that had somehow led this broken family to his door. And every morning, when Thomas walked out to check the fence by the old bridge, he whispered a quiet thank you to his wife, to fate, to whatever mysterious force had orchestrated their meeting. Because on that cold autumn day, when a frightened woman had told him not to touch her daughter, Thomas had reached out anyway. And what he felt had changed everything.